The first-class cabin of Liberty Airways Flight 447 held a silence so absolute, it felt like the air itself had stopped circulating. Marcus Bennett sat perfectly still in seat 1A, hands resting on the worn canvas of his backpack, eyes steady behind the rim of his glasses, as Captain Richard Caldwell loomed over him with the practiced authority of 3 decades spent commanding the skies. The captain's jaw was set, shoulders squared in that crisp white uniform, with 4 gold stripes that caught the overhead lights. Every line of his posture screamed certainty, the kind that came from 18,000 flight hours and 32 years of being obeyed without question. Standing just behind Caldwell's left shoulder, Sarah Mitchell gripped her tablet like a lifeline, knuckles white against the device's black case. 24 years old, blonde hair pulled back in the regulation bun, she looked like she wanted to disappear into the galley curtain. Her eyes kept darting between the captain and the man in the hoodie, calculating something she couldn't quite articulate. 50 passengers watched from their leather seats, some with champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips, others with phones already angled to capture whatever was about to unfold. The cabin lights cast everything in that warm, amber glow airlines use to make people feel sophisticated. But right now, it felt more like a spotlight on a stage nobody had bought tickets for. Derek Ashford stood near his seat in 1B, swaying slightly with a particular looseness that comes from 3 whiskeys before boarding and 2 more in the airport lounge. 26 years old, Armani blazer hanging open over a rumpled dress shirt, a Rolex Daytona worth $47,000 catching the light every time he gestured. His phone was already out, already recording, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth like he was watching street entertainment he hadn't paid for. Marcus said nothing, just sat there in his Northwestern University hoodie and faded Levi's, looking like someone's uncle who'd wandered into the wrong cabin by mistake. The gray threading through his hair at the temples gave him a distinguished air that the casual clothes somehow amplified rather than diminished, but nobody in first class seemed to notice that particular detail. 3 hours earlier, the story had been different. JFK Airport's Terminal 4 buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Monday evening rush, thousands of travelers flowing through security checkpoints and past overpriced Hudson News outlets selling water bottles for $6 and magazines nobody would finish reading. The first-class check-in counter sat off to one side, separated from the main ticket hall by velvet ropes and the invisible wall of assumption that kept most people in the longer line. Marcus had stood in that shorter line, with his backpack slung over one shoulder, watching the gate agent process the couple ahead of him with a kind of efficient warmth that comes from years of practice. Kelly Morgan, according to her name tag, looked to be about 28, with carefully applied makeup and the smile that airline training programs teach their employees to deploy like a corporate-approved weapon. The couple moved off towards security, and Marcus stepped forward. Kelly's smile didn't disappear exactly. It just shifted, contracted, became something more mechanical than genuine. Her eyes flicked from Marcus's face to his hoodie to the backpack and back again, doing that rapid assessment people don't realize they're doing until someone points it out. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, but her eyes kept returning to the screen, like she was reading something in a foreign language. The boarding pass, printed with a sound that seemed too loud in the carpeted quiet of the first-class area. She looked at it, looked at Marcus, looked at it again. The words came out careful, measured, with just enough emphasis to make them a question instead of a statement. "Sir, this is a first-class ticket. You're sure this is correct?" Marcus smiled, the kind of small, patient smile that suggested he'd had this exact conversation more times than he cared to count. His voice came out low, educated, with the faintest trace of Southside Chicago underneath the polish of Northwestern and Harvard Business School. "I'm sure." Kelly handed over the boarding pass like she was passing him something fragile, something that might shatter if handled wrong. Marcus took it without comment, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and headed toward security. Behind him, Kelly was already greeting the next passenger in line, a white man in his 50s wearing a polo shirt and khakis, and her voice had that warmth back in it, that easy comfort that made people feel like they belonged exactly where they were. The Liberty Club lounge sat past security, up an escalator, through a set of frosted glass doors that opened with a whisper of hydraulics. Inside, the world transformed into leather armchairs and abstract art, a self-service bar with pop-shelf liquor, and a buffet spread that actually looked like food instead of the usual airport approximation of it. Marcus found a seat in the corner, away from the windows overlooking the tarmac, away from the clusters of business travelers comparing expense reports and travel schedules. He pulled out his laptop, opened it to a spreadsheet that would have meant nothing to anyone glancing over his shoulder, and settled in to watch. The lounge attendant, a white man in his 30s named Brian, according to his name tag, moved through the space with practiced efficiency. A couple at the window got fresh champagne almost before they'd finished their first glass. An older gentleman reading the Wall Street Journal received a fresh plate of appetizers without having to ask. Marcus waited. 15 minutes passed. Other passengers came and went, some staying just long enough to grab a drink before heading to their gates, others settling in like they lived there. Brian circulated, attentive, professional, making eye contact and small talk with almost everyone. Marcus raised his hand once. Brian's eyes slid past him like he was furniture. 10 more minutes. Marcus raised his hand again, this time holding it up long enough that his shoulders started to ache. Brian finally arrived with a smile that looked apologetic but not quite genuine. The kind of expression people use when they're going through motions they don't actually feel. "What can I get you, sir?" The question itself was fine. The delay before it, the way it came out, just slightly different from how Brian had greeted the white passengers. The microscopic shift in body language, that told the real story. Marcus ordered sparkling water. Brian brought it 3 minutes later, already moving away before Marcus could say thank you. The phone buzzed in Marcus's pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen. Catherine Walsh, his CFO, the woman who'd been with him since he'd bought his first courier van 26 years ago, and who'd helped architect the acquisition that had made him owner of Liberty Airways 6 months back. Her voice came through tight with controlled worry. "Marcus, we need to talk about the FAA situation." Marcus kept his voice low, one eye on the lounge around him. "I'm listening." 3 more complaints came in over the weekend, all from passengers of color, all describing similar treatment, assumptions about whether they belonged in first class, extra scrutiny of their tickets, comments from other passengers that crew didn't address. Catherine's exhale came across as static. The FAA's Civil Rights Office sent a formal inquiry letter. They're talking about a full audit. Marcus pulled up a file on his laptop, scanned the numbers he'd been reviewing all week. 43 complaints in 6 months. Not all of them valid, not all of them clear-cut, but enough of a pattern to draw attention from regulators who'd been watching the industry's diversity record like hawks since the last round of viral incidents. "That's why I'm here, Kate. I need to see it myself." A pause on the other end, the kind that meant Catherine was choosing her words carefully. "Marcus, you don't have to do this. We can hire consultants, bring in auditors, fix the training programs. I need to know what it feels like. Not read about it in a report, not hear about it secondhand. I need to know what our passengers are experiencing when nobody thinks the owner is watching." Catherine's sigh carried the weight of 6 months trying to convince her boss that some battles didn't require personal sacrifice. "Just be careful. And Marcus, try not to get arrested." The memory of Atlanta 3 months ago still stung. Marcus had made it as far as boarding before a gate agent had flagged his ticket as suspicious, called a supervisor, and held up the entire flight for 20 minutes while they verified that yes, a black man in a hoodie really did have a valid first-class ticket. He'd revealed himself then, quietly, to the supervisor, and watched the color drain from both employees' faces as they realized exactly who they'd just detained. Nobody got fired from that incident. Marcus had made sure of it. But the training programs got updated, new protocols were written, and he'd added 2 more cities to his list of places to check. This was number 3. Chicago. Home. The route he'd flown 1,000 times, first as a college kid visiting family, then as a young entrepreneur building his logistics company, then as a CEO expanding into air freight, and now as the owner of an airline trying to figure out why his company kept making the news for all the wrong reasons. The boarding call came over the intercom, that carefully modulated voice announcing Flight 447 to Chicago O'Hare, now boarding all passengers. Marcus shut his laptop, slipped it into his backpack, and joined the line forming at the gate. Derek Ashford appeared like a small weather system, loud and disruptive, cutting through the orderly queue with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in a way that stuck. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with whiskey arrived before he did, a cloud of entitlement that made the gate agent, a middle-aged black woman named Amanda, visibly tense. "Do you know who my father is?" The question came out slurred at the edges, loud enough that everyone in the gate area could hear. Derek's face was flushed, his eyes too bright, his gestures too large. "Senator William Ashford, Transportation Committee. I need an upgrade to first class, and I need it now." Amanda's voice stayed level, professional, the tone of someone who dealt with this exact situation too many times to count. "Sir, I understand, but first class is completely full. I can put you on the wait list. I don't do wait lists." Derek leaned against the counter, not quite steadying himself. "My father personally knows the CEO of this airline. One phone call, and you'll be working security at some regional airport in Nebraska. Now find me a seat." Marcus watched from his position in the queue, 3 people back, taking mental notes. Derek Ashford. He'd seen the name in the files, in the incident reports that had to be escalated to executive level because of who his father was. 4 alcohol-related disruptions in 18 months. 2 sexual harassment complaints from flight attendants that had been settled with NDAs and checks written by the company's legal department. A permanent ban recommendation that had been overridden by the previous CEO, a political appointee who'd valued connections over principles. Amanda's fingers moved across her keyboard, each keystroke a small act of resignation. I'll see what I can do, Mr. Ashford." The man behind Marcus in line, a businessman in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and an expression that suggested he found the whole scene distasteful, leaned in close enough to whisper, "Some people think money buys everything." Marcus didn't respond. Just watched as Amanda somehow conjured a first-class seat assignment for Derek, printed a new boarding pass, and handed it over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Zone 1 boarding began, and Marcus joined the line of first-class passengers filing down the jetway. The tunnel smelled like jet fuel and recycled air, the walls covered in that textured material that's supposed to look modern, but mostly looks like a failed attempt at luxury. Sarah Mitchell stood at the aircraft door, smile bright and practiced, welcoming passengers aboard with the rehearsed warmth of someone 2 years into a career that hadn't yet worn down her enthusiasm. She greeted the elderly white woman ahead of Marcus with genuine delight, using her name from the manifest, commenting on her destination, making small talk about the weather in Chicago. Marcus reached the door. Sarah's smile stayed in place, but something in her eyes shifted. That same microscopic calculation he'd seen from Kelly at check-in. Her voice came out just slightly cooler, just slightly more formal. "Your seat number, sir?" Not "welcome aboard," not the personal greeting she'd given the passenger 30 seconds earlier. Just the question, delivered with professional courtesy, that somehow felt like a barrier rather than an invitation. Marcus showed his boarding pass without comment. Sarah glanced at it, then at him, then back at the pass like she was checking for signs of forgery. Her lips pressed together for just a moment, not quite pursed, but not quite neutral either. "First class is forward." She gestured vaguely toward the front of the aircraft. Marcus moved past her into the cabin, feeling her eyes follow him all the way to his seat. Seat 1A sat on the left side of the aircraft, window position, the most coveted spot in first class. The leather was butter soft under his hands as he stowed his backpack in the overhead bin, the space around him generous enough to actually be comfortable. The seats in this cabin cost $2,400 one way, a price point that served as much as a social filter as a revenue generator. The cabin filled slowly, that particular choreography of people claiming their territory in the sky. A businessman took 1C across the aisle, immediately pulling out his laptop and a stack of papers that screamed, "Important work that can't wait." An elderly couple settled into 2A and 2B directly behind Marcus, the husband already complaining about the temperature, the wife shushing him with the patience of 50 years of practice. Derek Ashford appeared in the aisle like a storm cloud, bringing noise and disruption with him. He'd somehow acquired another drink between the gate and the aircraft door, and he wielded it like a prop in a performance nobody had asked to see. Sarah's entire demeanor transformed. The cool professionalism vanished, replaced by warmth so sudden and so bright, it was almost painful to witness. "Mr. Ashford, welcome back! So good to see you again." Derek grinned, swaying slightly as he reached out to pat Sarah's shoulder in a gesture that lingered just long enough to cross from friendly into inappropriate. "Hey there, sweetheart. They treating you right?" Sarah's smile stayed fixed in place even as her shoulders tensed. "Always, sir. Your seat is 1B, right here next to—" She gestured toward Marcus, then seemed to realize what she was about to say and stopped. Derek dropped into 1B, his carry-on bag hitting the overhead bin with more force than necessary. He glanced over at Marcus, did that same visual calculation everyone else had done, and smirked. "Yo, buddy!" Derek's voice carried that particular false friendliness drunk people use when they think they're being charming. "This section's pretty pricey. You sure you're in the right spot?" Marcus turned his head slowly, met Derek's eyes with a gaze that gave away exactly nothing. "I'm sure." Derek laughed, the sound too loud in the enclosed space. "Hey, no judgment, man. Just saying, these seats run like $2,000. That's a lot of money, you know." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Marcus could feel the other passengers listening now, that shift in attention that happens when conflict emerges in a confined space. The businessman across the aisle had stopped typing. The elderly couple behind him had gone quiet. Marcus turned back to his tablet without responding. The screen showed a document he'd been reviewing earlier, a report on customer satisfaction metrics broken down by demographic group. The numbers told a story that matched everything he was experiencing right now. Black passengers rated their first-class experience an average of 2 points lower than white passengers on the 10-point scale. Not because the seats were different or the champagne was cheaper, but because of moments exactly like this one, multiplied across thousands of flights and millions of interactions. Sarah returned with a tray of champagne flutes, the pre-departure service that made first-class passengers feel special before the aircraft even pushed back. She moved down the aisle with practiced grace, offering glasses to each passenger with a smile and a word of welcome. The businessman in 1C got his champagne with a warm greeting and a comment about hoping he had a pleasant flight. The elderly couple in row 2 received theirs with a question about whether they were visiting family in Chicago. Sarah reached Marcus's row. She handed Derek his glass first, leaning in close, her smile bright. "Here you go, Mr. Ashford. We have the Veuve Clicquot today." Derek took it with another one of those too familiar gestures, his hand brushing against hers. "You're the best, babe." Then Sarah turned to Marcus. The smile was still there, but it had contracted again, become something more perfunctory. She held out a glass, but the warmth she'd shown everyone else had evaporated. No greeting, no comment about the champagne, just the glass extended in silence. Marcus took it with a quiet "thank you" that she didn't acknowledge. She moved on to the next row, and that warmth came flooding back as she greeted the passengers there, asked them about their day, made them feel seen and valued. Marcus sipped the champagne, Veuve Clicquot, like she'd told Derek. Probably $300 a bottle, served in plastic flutes that tried hard to look like crystal. It tasted like every other champagne he'd ever had on an airplane. Acceptable, expensive, and ultimately forgettable. What wasn't forgettable was the pattern, the systematic difference in treatment, subtle enough that any single instance could be explained away as coincidence, or personality, or just having an off moment, but obvious enough in aggregate that it painted a clear picture of unconscious bias at work. More passengers boarded, filling the cabin to capacity. Marcus counted them automatically. 24 seats in first class, all occupied. 53 in economy, visible through the curtains separating the cabins. 77 passengers total, plus 5 crew members, all of them about to become part of a story that would change everything. Captain Richard Caldwell emerged from the cockpit, his appearance timed perfectly to make an impression. 55 years old, silver hair immaculately groomed, uniform pressed to perfection, moving with the authority of someone who'd spent 32 years being treated like a minor deity by passengers and crew alike. He made a show of walking through the cabin, greeting select passengers, shaking hands with the businessmen in 1C, exchanging pleasantries with the elderly couple in row 2. He reached Marcus's row, and his eyes slid past seat 1A like Marcus was invisible, focusing instead on Derek. "Mr. Ashford, good to see you again. Your father well?" Derek's face lit up with the validation of being recognized. "He's great, Captain. Thanks for asking." Caldwell nodded, squeezed Derek's shoulder in a gesture of camaraderie, and moved on without once acknowledging Marcus's existence. The door sealed with a pneumatic hiss that signaled the point of no return. The jetway pulled back. Ground crew in orange vests scurried around outside, doing their pre-departure checks with the organized chaos of people who'd done this same routine 10,000 times. Sarah appeared at the front of the cabin with the life vest and oxygen mask demonstration, going through the motions with the enthusiasm of someone who'd given this speech so many times the words had lost all meaning. Marcus watched her hands move through the gestures, pointing out exits and demonstrating how to inflate the vest, her voice carrying that sing-song quality of forced cheerfulness. The engine spooled up with a rising whine that vibrated through the airframe. The aircraft lurched into motion, rolling away from the gate, joining the queue of planes waiting their turn for departure. Through the window, Marcus could see the lights of JFK spreading out in all directions, a constellation of movement and purpose that never stopped, never slept, never paused to consider whether the people it served felt welcomed or just tolerated. They'd been taxiing for maybe 5 minutes when Sarah made her way down the aisle, pausing at Marcus's row with an expression that suggested she was working up courage to say something she'd rather not say. She leaned down, her voice pitched low enough that only Marcus and Derek could hear. "Excuse me, sir. I need to verify something about your ticket." Marcus looked up from his tablet. "What about it?" Sarah's hands twisted together, a nervous gesture that betrayed the discomfort behind her professional mask.
The manifest shows your seat as 1A, but there's a notation that this seat may have been reserved for another passenger. Derek leaned over, suddenly interested. Yeah, I was going to say something about that. The section's usually for, executives and stuff. You sure you didn't get upgraded by mistake? Marcus's voice stayed level, betraying none of the anger building in his chest. I'm sure. Sarah pressed on, clearly following a script someone else had written. Could I see your boarding pass again? And maybe your credit card, just to verify the purchase? The businessman across the aisle had stopped even pretending to work. The elderly couple behind Marcus had gone silent. Every passenger within earshot was watching now, some subtly, others openly, all of them waiting to see how this particular drama would unfold. Marcus pulled out his boarding pass, held it up so Sarah could see. M. Bennett, seat 1A, purchased 2 weeks ago. Confirmation number's right there. Sarah took the pass, studied it like she was looking for hidden messages in the barcode. And your credit card? Why? The question came out quiet, but sharp enough to make Sarah flinch. It's procedure when there's a question about what, exactly? Marcus set down his tablet, giving Sarah his full attention now. When there's a question about what? Sarah's face flushed, about whether the ticket was purchased legitimately. The words hung in the air between them, their implication crystal clear to everyone listening. Marcus could see the realization dawning on Sarah's face, the understanding that she'd just said something that couldn't be unsaid, that had crossed a line she hadn't meant to cross. I paid for this ticket with my American Express Platinum card. The charge went through 2 weeks ago. Liberty Airways took my money and assigned me this seat. What exactly are you questioning? Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, looked desperately toward the cockpit like she was hoping someone would rescue her from a situation that was spiraling out of her control. Derek, oblivious or uncaring, jumped in with the subtlety of a drunk man who thought he was being helpful. Look, dude, it's not personal. It's just, sometimes people get upgraded and they don't realize they're supposed to go back to economy after boarding. Happens all the time. Marcus turned to Derek with a look that could have frozen champagne in its glass. I wasn't upgraded. I purchased a first-class ticket. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for, and I'm not moving. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Derek's smile faltered, replaced by the belligerence of someone who wasn't used to being contradicted. Hey man, I'm just trying to help. I don't need your help. I need to be left alone to enjoy the flight I paid for. Sarah backed away, nearly stumbling in her haste to escape the confrontation. She disappeared through the curtain into the galley area, and Marcus could see her through the gap, talking rapidly to Emily Carter, the other flight attendant, gesturing back toward first class with obvious distress. 60 seconds later, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Caldwell emerged, his expression set in that particular combination of authority and annoyance that suggested he viewed this interruption as beneath his dignity, but necessary to maintain order in his domain. He approached Marcus's row with measured steps, each movement calculated to project control. When he spoke, his voice carried through the cabin with the resonance of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. Sir, I understand there's some confusion about your seat assignment. Marcus looked up at the captain, his expression perfectly neutral. There's no confusion, Captain. I have a valid ticket for this seat. Caldwell's eyes flicked to the boarding pass Marcus still held, then back to Marcus's face. I'm going to need you to come with me to verify some information. Verify what information? Your ticket purchase, the payment method, your identification. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. That particular mix of anger and resignation that came from knowing exactly where this was going and being powerless to stop it without revealing cards he wasn't ready to play yet. I've already shown my boarding pass to your flight attendant. My identification was verified at check-in and at security. What additional verification do you need? Caldwell's jaw tightened. Sir, I'm the captain of this aircraft. When I ask you to do something, you do it. Now please come with me. The businessman in 1C finally spoke up, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who thought his opinion mattered. Captain, I have to say, this is concerning. First class has certain standards, and if this passenger can't verify he belongs here, I belong here. Marcus's voice cut through the businessman's words with surgical precision. I paid for this seat. I have documentation proving it, and I'm not going anywhere. Caldwell's face flushed red, a vein pulsing in his temple. 32 years of unchallenged authority colliding with a passenger who refused to be intimidated. Sir, if you don't comply, I will have no choice but to remove you from this aircraft. Derek pulled out his phone, started recording, a grin spreading across his flushed face like he was watching entertainment he'd paid admission for. This is gonna be good. Marcus looked at the captain, at the phone recording him, at the 50-plus passengers watching this unfold, and made a decision. Not yet. Not like this. Let it play out a little longer. Let them commit fully to their assumptions before revealing just how catastrophically wrong those assumptions were. Captain Caldwell, Marcus said, his voice so calm it seemed to lower the temperature in the cabin another few degrees. I strongly suggest you check your manifest more carefully before you make your next move. Caldwell pulled out his tablet, jabbed at the screen with fingers made clumsy by anger. Sarah appeared beside him, pulling up the passenger manifest, scrolling through the entries with growing desperation. M. Bennett, she whispered, pointing at the screen. Seat 1A, VIP priority designation. But it doesn't show a full name, and there's no profile photo attached. Caldwell grabbed the tablet, studied it with narrowed eyes. Marcus could see the wheels turning, the captain trying to reconcile the information on the screen with the man sitting in front of him, and failing to make the connection that should have been obvious. The VIP priority designation was right there. The auto upgrade to first class, the special handling instructions, all of it pointing to someone important enough that the system had flagged him for extra attention. But Caldwell, like Sarah, like Kelly at check-in, like every other employee who'd interacted with Marcus tonight, couldn't reconcile those flags with the reality of a black man in a hoodie. The cognitive dissonance was almost visible, a wall of assumptions so thick it blocked out evidence that contradicted what they'd already decided was true. The system shows VIP priority, Caldwell said slowly, but I don't have verification of who this person is or whether they're authorized to be in this seat. Marcus waited. Let the captain dig the hole deeper. I'm going to need you to move to economy while we sort this out. No. The single word landed like a stone in still water, ripples of shock spreading through the cabin. Caldwell's face went from red to purple. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not moving. I have a valid ticket. I'm sitting in my assigned seat, and you have no legal authority to remove me without cause. Derek's phone stayed up, recording everything, his voice cutting through the tension with drunken enthusiasm. Dude, just go sit in the back. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Marcus ignored him, keeping his eyes on Caldwell. Captain, I'm going to say this one time, very clearly. You are about to make the biggest mistake of your career. Before you do, I strongly recommend you verify who I am. Something in Marcus's tone must have penetrated because Caldwell hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face for the first time. He looked at Sarah, who looked back helplessly. He looked at the manifest again, at that VIP priority flag that should have told him everything he needed to know. But in the end, ego won out over caution, authority over verification, assumptions over evidence. Sarah, call ground security. I want this passenger removed from the aircraft.
The words echoed through the cabin, final and irrevocable. The kind of decision that couldn't be walked back once made. Marcus settled back in his seat, hands folded in his lap, expression serene as a Buddhist monk in meditation. He'd given Caldwell every chance to check, to verify, to question his own assumptions. The captain had chosen certainty over curiosity, authority over accuracy. Now there would be consequences. Sarah disappeared into the jetway, her voice audible through the open door as she radioed ground security. The cabin had gone completely silent, all 77 passengers holding their collective breath, watching a confrontation that had escalated from uncomfortable to potentially explosive in the span of 5 minutes. Derek kept filming, providing running commentary like a sports announcer. Man decides to squat in first class, refuses to leave. Captain calls security. This is wild. The elderly woman in 2B leaned forward, touched Marcus's shoulder with a trembling hand. Young man, maybe you should just move. It's not worth all this trouble. Marcus turned to her, his expression gentle despite the anger coiling in his chest. Ma'am, with respect, it's worth exactly this much trouble. Because if I move now, the next person who looks like me will have to move too. And the one after that. Sometimes you have to stand your ground. 2 security officers appeared at the aircraft door, both white, both wearing the serious expressions of people who'd been told they had a situation to handle. Michael Torres, the ground supervisor, came with them, his face already showing the exhaustion of someone who suspected this was going to be more complicated than the radio call had suggested. They made their way to first class, Torres in the lead, the 2 officers flanking him. I'm Michael Torres, ground operations supervisor. What's the situation, Captain? Caldwell straightened to his full height, projecting authority. This passenger refuses to verify his ticket purchase or move to his appropriate seat. I need him removed from the aircraft. Torres looked at Marcus, then at the boarding pass still in his hand. Sir, may I see your ticket and ID? Marcus handed them over without protest. Torres examined both carefully, his expression growing more confused by the second. He pulled out his own tablet, accessed the reservation system, scrolled through screens that made his eyebrows climb higher and higher on his forehead. Captain, Torres said carefully, this ticket is completely valid. Purchased 2 weeks ago with an American Express card ending in 4721. Payment cleared. Seat assignment confirmed. VIP priority status verified. Caldwell snatched the tablet, stared at it like the information might change if he looked hard enough. But who authorized the VIP status? What's this passenger's connection to the airline? Torres glanced at his own screen again, then at Marcus, then back at the screen, and Marcus could see the moment recognition dawned. The supervisor's face went pale, his hands starting to shake just slightly as he held the tablet. Captain, Torres said, his voice very quiet. I think you need to look at the full profile. Caldwell grabbed the tablet again, jabbed at the screen to expand the passenger details. The VIP priority entry, the automatic first-class upgrade authorization, the note to provide white glove service, and finally,
buried 3 screens deep in a location Caldwell should have checked first, but hadn't because his assumptions had told him there was no need. The passenger's full name and title: Marcus James Bennett, Chief Executive Officer and Chairman, Liberty Airways Incorporated. The color drained from Caldwell's face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug.
His mouth opened, closed, opened again, no sound coming out. The tablet slipped from his fingers, only Torres's quick reflexes preventing it from hitting the floor. Sarah, watching from behind the captain, made a sound like all the air had been punched out of her lungs. Derek, still recording, still oblivious, laughed. "See? Told you there was something wrong with—" Marcus reached into his jacket with deliberate slowness, pulled out a black leather wallet, and extracted a matte black card with gold embossing that caught the cabin lights. He held it up, letting everyone see the text clearly. Marcus James Bennett, Chief Executive Officer and Chairman, Liberty Airways Incorporated, Employee ID 000001. The silence that followed was so complete, Marcus could hear the ventilation system cycling air through the cabin, could hear Derek's phone still recording, could hear the elderly woman behind him whisper, "Oh my Lord," in a voice thick with shock. Torres found his voice first. "Mr. Bennett, we didn't. I sincerely apologize." Marcus held up his hand, cutting off the apology. His eyes never left Caldwell's face, watching the captain process the magnitude of what had just happened, watching 32 years of career security crumble in real time. When Marcus spoke, his voice was so quiet the passengers had to strain to hear, but every word landed with the force of a judge's gavel. "Captain Caldwell, in the last 15 minutes, you have violated federal anti-discrimination regulations, company policy regarding passenger treatment, and basic human decency. You demanded I verify ticket purchase that you never questioned from white passengers. You threatened to remove me from a seat I paid for based on assumptions about who belongs in first class. And you did all of this without once considering that your assumptions might be wrong." Caldwell's lips moved, forming words that wouldn't come out. Marcus stood, the movement slow and controlled, filling the space around him with an authority that had nothing to do with uniforms or titles, and everything to do with earned power and justified anger. "I gave you multiple opportunities to check, to verify, to question your own assumptions. You chose not to take any of them." He turned to Sarah, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the galley flooring. "Miss Mitchell, you treated me differently from every other passenger in this cabin. Different tone, different service, different assumptions. And when I challenged that treatment, you escalated instead of reflecting." Derek finally lowered his phone, understanding starting to penetrate the alcohol haze. His face went from flushed to ashen in the span of a heartbeat. Marcus turned back to Caldwell. "Captain, you will fly this aircraft to Chicago. When we land, you and I will have a very serious conversation about your future with this airline. Miss Mitchell, the same applies to you." He looked around the cabin, making eye contact with each passenger who'd watched this unfold, who'd witnessed the assumptions and the escalation and the dramatic reversal. "As for the rest of you, I hope you've learned something about the danger of judging people by their appearance." Marcus sat back down in 1A, pulled out his tablet, and returned to the report he'd been reading like nothing had happened. The cabin stayed frozen for a long moment, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. Then Torres cleared his throat, gestured for the security officers to leave,
and followed them out with the posture of a man who knew he'd just dodged a bullet, but wasn't sure if the gun was empty yet. Caldwell retreated to the cockpit without another word, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Sarah fled to the galley where Marcus could hear her crying softly. Derek slumped in his seat, phone finally dark, the recording ended, his face the color of old newspaper. The elderly woman behind Marcus leaned forward again, her voice trembling. "Mr. Bennett, we judged you. We were wrong. I'm so sorry." Marcus turned, gave her a small nod. "Thank you, ma'am. But the apology I need isn't for me. It's for all the other passengers who look like me, who don't have the power to fight back, who just accept this treatment because they don't have any other choice." The aircraft began to move again, resuming its taxi to the runway, the pause barely registering in the flight schedule, but marking a moment that would reshape everything that came after. Through the window, Marcus could see the lights of New York falling away as they rolled toward departure. His phone buzzed with incoming messages. Catherine must have set up monitoring on his location and flight status, must have received alerts when the security call went out. He ignored them for now.
There would be time for explanations and strategy sessions and damage control. Right now, he just wanted to sit in the seat he'd paid for, drink his champagne that had gone warm while he was being interrogated, and think about all the passengers who'd faced this same treatment without his resources or power or ability to fight back. The engine spooled up to full power, the brakes released. Flight 447 accelerated down the runway, lifted into the night sky, climbing toward cruising altitude, and consequences that would ripple far beyond this single flight. Marcus closed his eyes and allowed himself one moment of exhaustion, one moment of feeling the weight of what he'd just experienced and what was still to come. Then he opened them again, pulled up his laptop, and started documenting everything that had happened. Every word, every gesture, every assumption, building a case that would change how his airline treated passengers, even if it meant tearing down systems he'd inherited and rebuilding them from scratch. 3 hours earlier, this had been a test. Now, it was evidence. And before this flight landed in Chicago, it would become something else entirely. A reckoning that would reshape an industry and cost people their careers, and prove that power without accountability was just another form of tyranny. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Marcus accepted a bottle of water from Emily, who brought it with shaking hands and an apology she couldn't quite articulate. He thanked her quietly, recognizing that she'd been complicit through inaction, but might still be reachable through education. Outside the window, clouds slid past like ghosts, the aircraft cutting through darkness toward a destination that suddenly felt very far away. Marcus sipped his water and waited for the next chapter of this story to unfold, knowing that the hardest parts were still ahead, that revelation was just the beginning of transformation, and that sometimes the only way to change a system was to break it open and expose everything hiding inside. The Liberty Airways headquarters occupied 14 floors of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, views stretching across the loop toward Lake Michigan. At 11:47 p.m., most of those floors sat dark and empty, the cleaning crews having finished hours ago. But on the 12th floor, in the executive war room with its wall of monitors and conference table that could seat 20, every light burned bright. Catherine Walsh stood at the head of that table, her blazer discarded over a chair, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, reading glasses perched on her nose as she scrolled through incident reports on a tablet. 52 years old, CFO for 6 months, but Marcus's right hand for 26 years, she'd built her career on being the person who anticipated problems before they became crises. Tonight, she was 3 steps behind,
and falling further with every notification that lit up her phone. David Hammond paced near the windows, his reflection ghosting across the glass as he moved. VP of Legal, former federal prosecutor, the kind of lawyer who charged $800 an hour and earned every penny. His tie hung loose around his neck, top button undone, the composed facade he showed clients and juries cracking under the weight of what was unfolding. Patricia Morgan sat at the far end of the table, laptop open, fingers flying across keys as she compiled data that would have made most HR professionals resign on the spot.
48 years old, black woman who'd spent her entire career in human resources, climbing through ranks at companies that paid lip service to diversity while maintaining cultures that made people like her work twice as hard for half the recognition. She'd joined Liberty Airways 3 months ago because Marcus had promised real change. Tonight would test whether that promise meant anything. The center monitor displayed Flight 447's position, a small plane icon crawling across a map toward Chicago. ETA, 73 minutes. Below it, a second screen showed social media feeds, the hashtag Liberty Airways Racism climbing toward 50,000 mentions and accelerating. Catherine's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, felt her stomach drop another notch. That's the 4th board member in 20 minutes. They want an emergency meeting. Hammond stopped pacing. What are you telling them? That we're handling it. That Marcus is personally managing the situation.
And when they ask what handling it means? Catherine set down the tablet, rubbed her eyes with the heels of her hands. I tell them the truth. That our CEO was racially profiled on his own airline, that the incident is now viral, and that we're about to have every civil rights organization and federal regulator in the country crawling up our ass. Patricia looked up from her laptop. Stocks down another 3% in after-hours trading. That's 18% since the video started spreading. We've lost $2.8 billion in market cap in under 2 hours. The number hung in the air like smoke from a gun nobody could put down. Catherine walked to the window, stared out at the city lights, tried to calculate the cascading consequences of what was happening 35,000 feet above them. Hammond's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, winced. It's Senator Ashford. Take it, Catherine said. Put it on speaker. Hammond tapped the screen, set the phone on the table. Senator, this is David Hammond, VP of Legal for Liberty Airways. I have CFO Catherine Walsh and VP of HR Patricia Morgan with me. The voice that came through carried the measured tones of someone used to wielding power, but currently feeling it slip through his fingers. I just watched a video of my son mocking your CEO. A video that's been viewed over 1 million times in the last hour. Tell me this isn't as bad as it looks. Catherine leaned toward the phone. Senator, I won't lie to you. It's worse. Your son filmed himself celebrating as our captain attempted to remove Marcus from his seat. He made comments about knowing your place and posted it publicly with commentary that's being interpreted as racially motivated. Silence on the other end, the kind that stretched out long enough to become its own statement. Senator Ashford's exhale came across as static. What do you need from me? We need Derek on the ground when that plane lands. We need him sober, and we need you to understand that Liberty Airways will be pressing charges for assault, harassment, and creating a disturbance on an aircraft. Assault? He grabbed a flight attendant's wrist hard enough to leave bruises. It's on video. Multiple passengers recorded it. The FAA takes this seriously, Senator, and so do we. Another long pause, then the sound of breathing that suggested someone trying very hard to maintain composure. I've spent 30 years building a reputation. My son just destroyed it in 5 minutes of drunken stupidity. Patricia spoke up, her voice carrying none of the deference politicians usually received. With respect, Senator, your son didn't destroy your reputation tonight. Your son revealed character that was already there.
The only question now is whether you're going to try to make this go away with money and connections, or whether you're going to let him face consequences that might actually teach him something. The line went dead. Hammond picked up his phone, checked the screen. He hung up. Good, Patricia said. Means he's thinking instead of threatening. Those are our two options with people like him. They either think or they attack. Thinking is better. Catherine's tablet lit up with an incoming call. Marcus. She answered on the second ring, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear. His voice came through clear despite the aircraft noise in the background. Kate, status report. Stock's down 18%. Social media's exploding. Board wants an emergency meeting. Senator Ashford called, threatening consequences until Patricia shut him down. FAA's Chicago office left 3 messages, and we've had 24 media requests in the last 30 minutes. Legal exposure? Hammond stepped closer to the tablet. Marcus, it's David. Substantial. Caldwell violated multiple federal regulations. Sarah Mitchell failed to follow company protocol. Derek Ashford committed at least 3 federal offenses. We're looking at FAA fines, possible DOT investigation, civil rights lawsuits from passengers who witnessed the incident, and negligent supervision claims. Good. Marcus's tone carried satisfaction rather than concern. Document everything. I want a complete legal brief ready when we land. Catherine felt her eyebrows climb. Good? Marcus, we're talking about potentially hundreds of millions in exposure. We're talking about evidence, Kate. Evidence that this isn't just a training problem or a few bad apples. This is systemic bias built into how we operate. And tonight, we're going to burn it out by the roots, even if it costs us half our market cap to do it. Patricia leaned forward. Marcus, it's Patricia. I've been pulling complaint data. In the 6 months since acquisition, we've had 43 formal discrimination complaints, 87 informal complaints that weren't escalated, 130 incidents documented in passenger emails that never made it to anyone who could act on them. How many resulted in disciplinary action? 3. All written warnings that went in files nobody ever reviewed. 0 terminations, 0 suspensions, 0 meaningful consequences. Marcus's silence stretched long enough that Catherine checked the tablet to make sure the connection hadn't dropped. When he spoke again, his voice had gone quiet and dangerous. Pull every file, every complaint, every incident report. I want names, dates, outcomes, and I want to know which executives approved or overrode disciplinary recommendations. Hammond cleared his throat. Marcus, that's going to implicate senior leadership, people who came with the acquisition, people with contracts and severance packages that would cost millions to terminate. I don't care if it implicates the Pope. This company has been paying settlements instead of fixing problems, writing checks instead of firing bigots, protecting revenue instead of passengers. That ends tonight. The war room monitors flickered as new data populated. Patricia had pulled up the complaint database, hundreds of entries scrolling past in categories that painted a picture of institutional failure. Discrimination based on race, religion, disability, gender identity, staff ignoring passenger harassment, security called disproportionately on passengers of color, assumptions about who could afford first class, who spoke English, who might be a threat. Catherine studied the data with growing horror. She'd known the numbers were bad. She hadn't realized they were catastrophic. Marcus, if we release this publicly, when we release it publicly, he corrected. Kate, I bought this airline to fix it, not to cover up decades of rot. Every person in this building who enabled this culture,
every executive who chose profit over principle, every middle manager who looked the other way. They're all going to face what they've done. That could include me, Catherine said quietly. I reviewed the acquisition. I looked at these complaint numbers. I flagged them as a concern, but I didn't push hard enough to make them a deal breaker. Did you try to suppress the information? No. Did you punish people who reported problems? No. Then you made a mistake in judgment, not a moral failure. Learn from it. Help me fix it. But understand that anyone who actively protected this culture, who silenced victims or paid them off or told them to accept it, those people are done. Hammond walked back to the window, stared out at the city. You're talking about cleaning house. Probably 20 to 30 senior and mid-level positions. That's institutional knowledge walking out the door. That's relationships with regulators and partners and clients. That's stability. Stability built on discrimination isn't stable, David. It's a tower waiting to collapse. Tonight it collapses on our terms, under our control, in a way that gives us a chance to rebuild it right. The flight tracking monitor showed Flight 447 beginning its descent. 58 minutes to landing. Catherine felt time compressing. Everything that needed to happen before that plane touched down, suddenly feeling impossible to accomplish. Marcus, what do you need from us in the next hour? Press release draft. Generic for now. Acknowledge the incident. Commit to full investigation. Zero tolerance for discrimination. Have it ready to release the moment we land. Contact the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, and the DOT Civil Rights Office. Tell them we're requesting independent audits. Schedule a press conference for 6 a.m. And Patricia, I want you to prepare termination paperwork for Richard Caldwell.
Patricia's fingers paused over her keyboard. You're firing him tonight?
I'm giving him the option to resign with dignity or be terminated for cause. But either way, he's not flying for Liberty Airways again.
What about Sarah Mitchell? Marcus's pause suggested he was wrestling with something.
Suspended pending investigation. She's young. She might be salvageable with proper training and mentorship. But she rides a desk for 90 days minimum while we figure out if she can unlearn what this company taught her.
Catherine pulled up the press release template, started drafting. The words felt inadequate for what had happened, too corporate and sanitized for the raw ugliness of discrimination caught on video and shared a million times. But they were a start, a first acknowledgement that would be followed by actions that actually meant something. Hammond paced again, thinking out loud.
We need to contact the passengers, all 77 of them, offer formal apologies, compensate them for having to witness this. Get ahead of the lawsuits before they start filing. Good, Marcus said through the speaker. Kate, work with David on that. I want personal letters from me, not some form letter from corporate affairs. These people watched their CEO get discriminated against. They need to know we take that seriously. Patricia pulled up another file, this one showing Derek Ashford's history with the airline. Marcus, Derek's been flagged 4 times for alcohol-related incidents and twice for sexual harassment. Each time, the complaint was overridden by the previous CEO with notes about maintaining political relationships. We paid 2 settlements totaling $82,000 rather than ban him. Who authorized those overrides? James Whitmore, your predecessor. Where's Whitmore now? Retired. Golden parachute. Lives in Palm Beach. Marcus's laugh came out bitter. Of course he does. Pull his contract. See if there's anything we can claw back based on malfeasance. And Patricia, I want a list of every passenger who was banned under Whitmore's tenure. I want to review each case personally, because I guarantee you there are people who got permanent bans for minor infractions while Derek Ashford got 4 chances and a first-class seat. The monitors flickered again, this time showing news coverage.
CNN had picked up the story, running it as breaking news with split-screen footage, Derek's video on one side, Marcus's employee photo on the other. The chyron read, "Black CEO confronted on own airline. Pattern of discrimination?" Catherine watched the coverage with her stomach in knots. The anchor was interviewing a civil rights attorney who spoke in measured tones about federal regulations and corporate liability.
Every word added another layer of exposure, another angle that regulators and lawyers would pursue in the months ahead. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down, felt her blood pressure spike. Marcus, the board chair's calling. Third time. I have to answer. Put him on speaker. Catherine switched lines, William Bradford's patrician voice filling the war room. 73 years old, Boston Brahmin, 4 decades on corporate boards. He'd opposed Marcus's acquisition bid until the price went high enough to make his objections financially irresponsible. Catherine, I've been trying to reach you for an hour. What in God's name is happening? You've seen the videos? Everyone's seen the videos. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Board members want answers. Major investors want assurances. And I want to know why our CEO thought it was a good idea to conduct some kind of social experiment that's cost us billions in market value. Marcus's voice cut through, cold and sharp.
William, it's Marcus. I'm on the line.
Bradford's pause suggested he hadn't expected the CEO to be listening. Marcus, I think you and I need to have a serious conversation about judgment and fiduciary responsibility. I think you and I need to have a serious conversation about why the board allowed a culture of discrimination to flourish for years while you collected 6-figure director fees and pretended not to notice. That's an outrageous accusation, is it? Patricia Morgan just pulled complaint data showing 43 formal discrimination complaints in 6 months, 87 informal complaints, not a single termination. The board received quarterly reports that included this data. You sat in meetings where these numbers were discussed. You signed off on settlements that swept problems under the rug instead of fixing them. So don't talk to me about judgment, William, when you and the rest of the board enabled exactly what happened to me tonight.
Bradford's breathing came across harsh and fast. The board has a responsibility to shareholders. The board has a responsibility to ensure this company operates ethically and legally. You failed. And tomorrow morning, at that emergency meeting you wanted, I'm going to lay out exactly how badly you failed and what we're going to do to fix it. If you don't like the plan, you're welcome to resign. The line went dead. Catherine stared at the phone, then at the tablet still carrying Marcus's call. You just threatened the board chair. I stated facts. He can either accept them and help fix the problem, or he can get out of the way. But I didn't buy this airline to be managed by people who prioritize stock price over human dignity. Hammond had stopped pacing, stood frozen by the window. Marcus, I have to say this as your lawyer. What you're doing is incredibly risky. You're alienating board members, threatening senior leadership, essentially declaring war on the culture that's been in place for decades. If this backfires, if the stock keeps falling and the board turns against you, they could remove you as CEO. Let them try. I own 52% of this company, David. They can't remove me without my consent. And I didn't spend $2.3 billion to preserve a culture that treats passengers like I was treated tonight. Catherine walked back to the table, sank into a chair that suddenly felt too hard to be comfortable. Marcus, I've been with you for 26 years. Through the courier service, the logistics expansion, the first airline acquisition, I've never seen you this angry. You've never seen me experience what millions of Black Americans experience every day, being judged, questioned, and threatened because of skin color. I knew it happened. I've read the statistics, reviewed the complaints, talked to passengers, but knowing and experiencing are different things. Tonight I felt what it's like to have your dignity stripped away by people who think they have the right to determine where you belong. Patricia closed her laptop,
met Catherine's eyes across the table. This is what it's always been like for us. Every flight, every interaction where someone questions whether we can afford the seat we're sitting in, whether we belong in first class, whether our ticket is legitimate. The only difference tonight is that the person it happened to had the power to do something about it. The weight of that truth settled over the war room like snow. Catherine thought about every flight she'd taken, every time she'd boarded first class with her platinum card and designer luggage, and no one had questioned her right to be there. Privilege she'd never had to think about because no one had ever challenged it. The flight tracker showed 33 minutes to landing.
Catherine pulled up the passenger manifest, started drafting personal apology letters, trying to find words adequate for witnessing what those 77 people had seen. Hammond sat down, opened his laptop, began outlining the legal strategy they'd need for the federal investigations that were coming. Patricia compiled the termination paperwork for Caldwell, suspension documentation for Sarah Mitchell, and the criminal complaint packet for Derek Ashford that would go to the FBI. 3 people working in synchronized crisis mode, each of them understanding that the next hour would shape everything that came after. The stock price could recover. The lawsuits could be settled. But the culture change Marcus was demanding, that would require dismantling and rebuilding systems that had been in place for 40 years. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from the marketing VP. CNN wants live interview when you land. MSNBC calling. Fox News requesting statement. What do I tell them? She typed back. Marcus does all interviews. Schedule them starting at 7 a.m. and clear my morning. We're going to be rebuilding this company from the ground up. The monitors flickered, new hashtags appearing. Justice for Marcus, boycott Liberty Air, fly while black. The story was metastasizing beyond a single incident into a broader conversation about discrimination in the airline industry. Other passengers were coming forward with their own stories, their own videos, their own experiences of being profiled and questioned and made to feel unwelcome in spaces they'd paid to occupy. Hammond looked up from his laptop. We're not going to be the only airline dealing with this. This is going to force industry-wide changes. Good, Marcus said through the speaker. Maybe some good comes out of tonight beyond just fixing Liberty Airways. Maybe every airline has to finally confront the bias in their systems.
Patricia pulled up another database, this one showing training records. Marcus, our current bias training is 1 hour of video modules that employees can click through without actually watching. No testing, no accountability, no follow-up to see if behavior changes. What do you recommend? 40 hours minimum. In-person sessions led by civil rights experts, role-playing exercises, testing with consequences for failure, annual recertification, and most importantly, clear disciplinary procedures with no exceptions for seniority or connections. Make it happen. I want the program designed and ready to implement within 30 days. Catherine watched the flight tracker. 15 minutes to landing. Her stomach churned with anticipation and dread in equal measure. Everything they were planning, all the bold declarations and sweeping changes, it all depended on Marcus sticking to his principles when the pressure really mounted, when shareholders screamed about stock prices and board members threatened legal action, and the media narrative shifted from heroic CEO to financial liability. The speaker crackled. We're beginning final descent. Kate, have security meet us at the gate. I don't want any passengers delayed while we handle Caldwell and Derek. They've been through enough tonight. Already arranged. FBI sending 2 agents for Derek. Airport police for crowd control. Medical for Sarah. She's going to need documentation of her injuries for your assault case against Derek. Good thinking. David, you'll be there? Wouldn't miss it. Patricia, I want you there too.
When we suspend Sarah, I want an HR professional present to ensure everything's documented properly. The war room fell into synchronized motion. 3 executives gathering tablets and phones and briefcases, heading toward the elevators that would take them down to the parking garage and the cars that would rush them to O'Hare. Catherine grabbed her blazer, slipped it on, and caught her reflection in the dark window. She looked exhausted, older than her 52 years, but also energized in a way she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. This was the Marcus she'd signed on with all those years ago, the one who saw broken systems and couldn't rest until he'd fixed them. The drive to O'Hare took 23 minutes through light, late-night traffic, Hammond driving his Mercedes with Patricia in the passenger seat and Catherine in the back, all of them silent and focused on phones that wouldn't stop buzzing with updates and questions and demands for information nobody had time to provide. They parked in the executive lot, badged through security that waved them past with recognition and curiosity in equal measure, made their way through empty terminals toward the gate where Flight 447 would arrive in 7 minutes. The gate area was already crowded with media despite the late hour, cameras and lights and reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of exactly which gate to stake out. Catherine spotted FBI agents in suits, airport police in uniform, and a nervous-looking gate agent who clearly hadn't expected her quiet Monday night shift to turn into national news. Hammond positioned himself between the media and the jetway door. No questions until the press conference. Mr. Bennett will make a statement then. A reporter shouted anyway. Is it true Liberty Airways has been paying off discrimination complaints for years? Catherine felt Patricia stiffen beside her. The question was well-informed, suggested someone had sources inside the company or access to sealed settlement agreements. This wasn't going to be a story that died with one news cycle. The flight tracker monitor showed Flight 447 on final approach. Through the terminal windows, Catherine could see the aircraft's landing lights cutting through darkness, growing larger as it descended toward the runway. 2 minutes. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. Tell Hammond I want Caldwell's termination handled at the gate. No reason to drag him through the terminal. He gets his dignity, even if he didn't give me mine. Catherine relayed the message. Hammond nodded, already pulling up the resignation agreement on his tablet, the one that would allow Caldwell to claim he'd chosen to leave rather than being fired for cause. A kindness Marcus didn't have to extend, but was offering anyway, because revenge wasn't the same as justice. The aircraft appeared at the gate, that familiar whine of engines spooling down, ground crew rushing to attach the jetway. Catherine could see faces in the windows, passengers probably aware something significant had happened, but not yet understanding the full scope of how one flight would change an entire company. The jetway door opened. FBI agents moved into position. Hammond straightened his tie. Patricia pulled up the suspension paperwork on her tablet, and Catherine took a breath that felt like standing on a cliff edge, about to step off into air and trust that what came next would be flight instead of falling. Marcus emerged first, that same hoodie and jeans from 3 hours ago, backpack over one shoulder, expression calm as still water. Behind him, Captain Caldwell walked with shoulders slumped, uniform that had started the flight crisp and commanding, now looking like something worn by a man who'd aged a decade in a few hours. Sarah Mitchell came next, eyes red from crying, Emily Carter supporting her with an arm around her waist. Then the passengers, some confused, some angry, several already on their phones recording everything for social media accounts that would turn this story into content for millions. Derek Ashford was last, flanked by airport police, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The FBI agents moved forward, badges out, and Catherine heard the Miranda warning being read as Derek's face went from pale
to green, the reality of federal charges finally penetrating whatever protective bubble of privilege he'd lived in his entire life. Marcus walked directly to Catherine, handed her his boarding pass and the black ID card that had ended Caldwell's career. "File these as evidence. I want documentation of everything." "Already handled. Medical's ready for Sarah. FBI's taking Derek. And Caldwell, give us a moment."
Marcus walked to where Caldwell stood with Hammond, the captain looking smaller than he had in the aircraft, diminished by the weight of consequences he'd never imagined when he'd made that first decision to question Marcus's right to be in seat 1A. Catherine couldn't hear what Marcus said, but she watched Caldwell's face as he listened, watched him nod slowly, watched him sign the resignation agreement Hammond offered without protest or negotiation, watched 32 years of career end, not with defiance, but with acceptance that maybe he'd earned exactly what was happening. The media surged forward as Marcus turned away from Caldwell, questions flying fast and overlapping. Marcus raised his hand, waited for silence, and when he spoke, his voice carried through the gate area with authority that needed no amplification.
"Tonight I experienced what millions of passengers of color experience regularly. Racial profiling, assumptions about whether I belonged in first class, and threats of removal from a seat I legally purchased. This happened on my own airline, which tells you how deep these problems run. Tomorrow at 6 a.m., I'll hold a press conference where I'll outline comprehensive changes to Liberty Airways' culture, training, and accountability systems. But understand this: what happened tonight is unacceptable, regardless of who it happened to. A CEO or a college student, a lawyer or a laborer. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. That's not a business principle. That's basic humanity. And Liberty Airways is going to operate with that understanding, or it's going to operate without me."
He walked past the cameras without taking questions, Catherine and Hammond and Patricia forming a protective wedge around him, pushing through the crowd toward the exit where cars waited to take them back to headquarters, and the all-night session that would transform outrage into action. Behind them, Derek Ashford was led away in handcuffs, the flash of cameras catching his face twisted with something that might have been remorse, or might have just been fear of consequences. Sarah Mitchell leaned against Emily, both of them crying now, their futures suddenly uncertain after a shift that had started like any other and ended with everything changed. Caldwell stood alone near the gate, watching Marcus leave, one hand pressed against the window glass like he could reach through it and take back the last 3 hours, rewind to the moment he'd first seen Marcus, and make a different choice about who deserved the benefit of doubt. But time only moved forward. Choices couldn't be unmade, and sometimes the only thing you could do was stand in the wreckage of your own assumptions and hope that somewhere in the rubble was a lesson worth learning. The cars pulled away from O'Hare, city lights streaming past as they headed back toward headquarters and the war room and the work that would consume the next 72 hours. Catherine watched Marcus in the seat beside her, saw the exhaustion and anger and determination all playing across his face in the passing streetlights. "You okay?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice carried something deeper than anger, something closer to grief. "I keep thinking about all the people this happened to, who couldn't fight back, who just accepted it, who got off that plane feeling smaller than when they got on. And I think about how long this has been happening, how many complaints were filed and ignored, how much money we paid to make problems disappear instead of fixing them. We're fixing it now. Are we? Or are we just putting a better face on the same broken system?" Catherine didn't have an answer for that. None of them did. All they had was a plan and a commitment, and the hope that sometimes the only way to change a system was to break it completely
and rebuild it from components that actually worked. The car pulled into the parking garage. They rode the elevator back up to the 12th floor, to the war room that would be their home until this crisis became something manageable, something that looked like progress instead of just damage control. The monitors still showed hashtags trending, stock prices falling, news coverage spreading. But they also showed something else. Other CEOs issuing statements, other airlines announcing policy reviews, an industry finally being forced to confront problems it had ignored for decades. Marcus sat down at the conference table, pulled his laptop close, and started typing the speech he'd give in 5 hours. Catherine watched him work, saw the words taking shape on screen, saw the vision for what Liberty Airways could become if they had the courage to actually transform instead of just reform. Outside the windows, Chicago slept, but in this war room, transformation was being written in policy drafts and training programs and accountability structures that would either save a company or prove that some institutions were too broken to be fixed. Either way, there was no going back. The confrontation in Seat 1A had guaranteed that. What came next would determine whether the braking had been destructive or necessary, whether Marcus's gamble would pay off or cost him everything he'd built. The monitors flickered, the stock ticker updated, and somewhere in America, passengers of color boarded flights, wondering if tonight would be the night they'd have to prove they belonged in the seats they'd paid for. Marcus kept typing. The work of revolution never slept.
The seatbelt sign chimed off at 35,000 feet, that soft electronic tone releasing passengers from their temporary restraint. The first-class cabin of Flight 447 remained suspended in awkward silence, the kind that follows a car accident when everyone's still processing what just happened, and nobody knows quite what to say. Marcus pulled his laptop from his backpack, opened it to a screen showing Liberty Airways' organizational chart. 347 executives and managers spread across 14 departments, each name a potential liability, each position a possible source of the rot he'd just experienced. His fingers moved across the trackpad, opening files Patricia had uploaded to the secure server. Complaint histories, settlement agreements, internal communications that showed patterns of behavior leadership had chosen to ignore. Emily Carter approached with a beverage cart, her movements cautious, like she was trying not to startle a dangerous animal.
26 years old, auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail, 3 years with the airline and probably wondering if she'd still have a job by morning. Mr. Bennett, can I get you anything? Marcus looked up, studied her face for signs of the same assumptions Sarah had shown. Emily met his eyes directly, no evasion, no calculating pause to determine whether he deserved service. Water, please. And Emily, you didn't participate in what happened earlier, I noticed that. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured water from a glass bottle into a crystal tumbler. I wanted to speak up. I should have. But I was scared of contradicting the captain, and Sarah's my supervisor, and I'm still on probation from when I called in sick too many times last year. Fear of consequences for doing the right thing. That's a culture problem, not a personal failing. Emily set the water down, her voice dropping low enough that only Marcus could hear. It happens more than people think. The assumptions.
The extra scrutiny for certain passengers. Most of us just go along because making waves means getting written up or losing shifts or being labeled as difficult. And jobs like this, they're hard to get. Good benefits, decent pay. You don't throw that away for principles when you've got student loans and rent. Marcus took a long drink, processing what she'd just confirmed. The discrimination wasn't just individual bias, it was enforced by a system that punished people for pushing back against it.
Fix the individuals, and the system would resurrect the same behavior in whoever replaced them. Fix the system, and you might actually change something permanent. Emily, I'm going to need you to document everything you've seen. Every incident where passengers were treated differently based on race or appearance or assumptions about class. Every time you wanted to speak up but didn't because of fear.
Can you do that? Her face showed the conflict, relief at being asked to do the right thing, warring with fear of retaliation. Will I be protected? Because if this gets out that I was the one who... You'll be protected. And when we rebuild the culture, people like you who were trying to do right despite a toxic system, you're who we build around. Emily nodded, moved on with her cart, and Marcus returned to his laptop. The files Patricia had compiled told a story of institutional failure stretching back years. A 2019 complaint from a black doctor who'd been asked to show his medical license to prove he could afford first class. A 2020 incident where a Muslim woman in hijab was questioned about her luggage 3 times before boarding. A 2021 case where a Hispanic family was separated and scattered through economy despite having purchased seats together because gate agents assumed the tickets were fraudulent.
Each complaint had been handled the same way: a settlement offer, a non-disclosure agreement, a notation in the file that no disciplinary action was warranted because the employee had been following procedure or acting on reasonable suspicion. Nobody fired, nobody suspended. Just money changing hands and problems pushed underground where they could fester. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text from Catherine. Press conference scheduled 6 a.m. Media platform ready. Board meeting set for 7 a.m. And Marcus, Bradford's calling other board members. He's trying to build support for a vote of no confidence. Marcus typed back. Let him try. I own controlling interest. They can't remove me without my shares, and I'm not selling to people who enabled this. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Catherine's response came through. That's what I told him. He's threatening to take it public, make it a proxy fight, get shareholders to pressure you. Marcus smiled without humor.
Bradford wanted a war. Fine. Wars were won by whoever was willing to burn the most bridges, and Marcus had just spent 3 hours experiencing exactly what this company had been doing to passengers who looked like him. He had all the motivation he needed to burn the whole structure down and rebuild from ashes. Derek Ashford stirred in seat 1B, finally sobering up enough to recognize that his world had fundamentally changed in ways he couldn't charm or buy his way out of. His phone lay dark on the tray table, either dead or turned off, cutting him off from the social media firestorm that had his name trending alongside words like entitled, racist, and privilege. Derek's voice came out hoarse. Mr. Bennett, I need to explain. Marcus turned his head slowly, fixed Derek with a look that could have frozen water. You need to be quiet. Anything you say right now is being heard by 77 potential witnesses who could be called to testify in your criminal trial. So unless you want to add more evidence to what's already been recorded and uploaded by a dozen passengers, I suggest you sit there and contemplate how you got to this point. Derek's mouth opened, closed, no sound emerging. His hands shook as he reached for the glass of water Emily had left him, nearly knocked it over, steadied it with an effort that showed just how far his coordination had degraded. The businessman across the aisle, Harold Peterson, Marcus had learned from the manifest, leaned across with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for permission to speak. 67 years old, retired investment banker, probably used to being the most important person in any room he occupied. Mr. Bennett, I owe you an apology. When the captain first questioned you, I supported his decision. I made assumptions based on
based on appearance rather than facts. That was wrong. Marcus studied Harold, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus fear of consequences.
The man's discomfort seemed authentic, the kind that came from confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself, rather than just worrying about lawsuits. Mr. Peterson, I appreciate that, but the apology I need isn't just words. It's a commitment to speak up next time you see someone being treated unfairly, because there will be a next time, on planes, in restaurants, in boardrooms, and if good people stay silent, nothing changes. Harold nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. You're right. I've been that silent good person too many times. Told myself it wasn't my business, wasn't my fight. But silence is a choice, isn't it? And choosing to stay silent when someone's being discriminated against makes you part of the problem. The words hung in the cabin, and Marcus saw heads turning, other passengers listening. The elderly woman from 2B, Helen Peterson, Harold's wife, reached forward to touch Marcus's shoulder again. Young man, my mother was from Poland. She came through Ellis Island in 1952. They changed her name from Kowalski to Peterson because the immigration officer said it was too hard to spell. She spent 40 years being ashamed of her accent, terrified someone would discover she wasn't born here. And I never connected that to what other people experience until tonight. I just saw you as different and assumed different meant wrong. Marcus turned to face her, saw genuine pain in eyes that had lived through 7 decades of American history. Mrs. Peterson, thank you for being honest. That awareness, that's the first step. The second step is doing something with it. Movement near the galley caught Marcus's attention. Sarah Mitchell stood there with Emily, both of them visible through the curtain gap, Sarah's face blotchy from crying. Emily was speaking quietly, one hand on Sarah's shoulder, the body language suggesting comfort mixed with difficult truth-telling. Marcus's phone buzzed again. Catherine, FBI wants to interview you when you land. Standard procedure for the Derrick assault case. They're bringing in Civil Rights Division 2, separate investigation into whether Caldwell violated federal anti-discrimination laws. Marcus, good. I want everything documented and prosecuted to the fullest extent. No deals, no compromises. This is the line in the sand. His laptop screen refreshed with new data from Patricia. She'd compiled a comparison of how passengers were treated based on demographic information pulled from loyalty program data. Black passengers were 3 times more likely to have their tickets questioned. Hispanic passengers twice as likely to be subjected to random additional screening. Muslim passengers flagged for extra questioning at rates completely divorced from any security logic. The numbers painted a picture of systemic bias so pervasive it had become invisible to the people perpetrating it. It wasn't malice, or not just malice. It was assumptions so deeply embedded in operational culture that they felt like common sense. Of course you check the ticket of the black man in first class. Of course you question whether the Hispanic family's tickets are legitimate. Of course you give extra scrutiny to the Muslim woman. It's just being careful, just following your instincts, just making sure. Except those instincts were trained by a culture that taught people of color were less likely to belong, less likely to be truthful, more likely to be threats. And every time someone acted on those instincts without consequence, the culture reinforced itself and spread to new employees who learned the unwritten rules by watching how veterans operated. Marcus opened a new document, began drafting the policy changes that would roll out in the next 90 days. Mandatory bias training, not the online click-through modules Patricia had described, but intensive in-person sessions led by experts in systemic discrimination. Regular auditing of passenger interactions with metrics tracking whether certain demographics were being treated differently. Clear disciplinary procedures with escalating consequences for bias, up to and including immediate termination. But policy was only part of it. The harder work was cultural transformation, changing the assumptions people brought to work every day, the shortcuts their brains took when making split-second decisions about who to trust and who to question. You couldn't policy your way out of bias that operated below conscious awareness. You had to make people aware of it, make them accountable for it, and create systems that caught it before it turned into discrimination. David, the male flight attendant, approached from the rear cabin. 30 years old, black, built like someone who spent serious time in the gym. He stopped at Marcus's row, voice pitched low. "Mr.
Bennett, can I speak with you privately?" Marcus unbuckled, followed David to the galley area where they could talk without the entire cabin listening. David's expression carried anger mixed with vindication, the look of someone who'd been proven right about something he'd been arguing for years. "I've worked for Liberty Airways for 8 years. Every single year, I filed complaints about how passengers of color are treated. Every single year, nothing happens, except I get marked down in my review for not being a team player. Tonight you experienced in 3 hours what I and every other black employee have been dealing with for years." Marcus leaned against the galley counter. "Tell me what you need changed." David pulled out his phone, showed Marcus a photo of a document, looked like an internal memo from 2022. The subject line read, "Addressing employee concerns regarding alleged discriminatory practices." This was management's response to a group complaint signed by 47 employees of color. They acknowledged we raised important concerns and committed to reviewing our processes. Then nothing changed except 3 of the people who organized the complaint got transferred to less desirable routes, and 2 quit because the retaliation was so obvious nobody could work under those conditions. Marcus photographed the document with his own phone, feeling fury rise in his chest. Who signed this memo? VP of Operations, James Whitmore's direct report. Still works for us, by the way. Got a promotion last year. Not anymore. Send me everything you have, every complaint, every memo, every piece of evidence that shows leadership knew about these problems and chose to protect themselves instead of employees and passengers. David's expression shifted from anger to cautious hope. "You're serious about this?" "Actually serious, not just making noise until the news cycle moves on."
I don't make noise, David. I make changes or I burn things down. Sometimes both. A smile cracked David's face, the first genuine expression of optimism Marcus had seen from any crew member all night. "Then you should know, there's a group of about 60 employees who've been documenting problems for years. We have records, recordings, emails, everything. We were building a class action lawsuit. But if you're actually willing to fix this from the inside, we'd rather give you the chance. Give me the contact info. I'll meet with all of you this week." David nodded, returned to the rear cabin, and Marcus made his way back to 1A. The cabin had shifted again, passengers no longer pretending not to watch him, instead showing open curiosity and, in some cases, what looked like respect. The power dynamic had inverted completely, where an hour ago he'd been the one questioned and doubted. Now he was the one everyone watched for cues about how to react. Marcus settled back into his seat, pulled up a secure messaging app, and sent a group text to Catherine, Hammond, and Patricia. "We need to schedule a meeting this week with approximately 60 employees who've been documenting discrimination issues. They have evidence leadership has been ignoring and retaliating against whistleblowers. This is bigger than I thought." Catherine responded first. "How much bigger?" "Marcus, systematic suppression of internal complaints, retaliation against employees who reported problems, possible coordination between multiple levels of management to protect the status quo. We're not talking about a few bad actors. We're talking about institutional capture." Hammond's response came through 30 seconds later. "That's federal territory. Conspiracy to violate civil rights. Obstruction. Possibly RICO if you can show pattern of behavior across management. Marcus, this could take down half your leadership team." Marcus typed. Good.
Anyone who participated in suppressing these complaints needs to go. I don't care how senior they are or how hard they'll be to replace. We can't reform a culture while the people who poisoned it are still in positions of authority. The aircraft hit a patch of rough air, turbulence jostling passengers and making carry-on bins creak. Marcus gripped his armrest, felt the familiar slight unease that came from being in a metal tube 5 miles above the earth, with nothing but physics keeping you from falling. He'd flown thousands of times, understood aerodynamics, knew turbulence was normal. Didn't make the lizard brain shut up about the fundamental wrongness of human flight. The turbulence worsened, the seatbelt sign chiming back on, Emily's voice over the intercom asking everyone to remain seated. The aircraft dropped suddenly, that stomach-lurching sensation of an elevator with cut cables, and somewhere in economy, a child started crying.
Sarah appeared from the galley, moving quickly down the aisle, checking that passengers were buckled. She reached Marcus's row, met his eyes for the first time since his revelation, and her face showed layers of emotion. Shame, fear, regret, and underneath it all, the desperate hope that maybe she could salvage something from the wreckage of her career.
Mr. Bennett, your seatbelt... It's fastened. Sarah nodded, moved to check Derek, then continued down the aisle. The aircraft bucked again, harder this time, and Sarah lost her balance. Her shoulder hit an armrest, momentum carrying her forward, and her head connected with the edge of a seat back with a sound that made everyone in first class wince. Marcus was unbuckling before conscious thought caught up to reflex, moving into the aisle despite the seatbelt sign, reaching Sarah as she slumped against a seat. Blood ran from a cut above her eyebrow, bright red against pale skin, and her eyes had gone unfocused in a way that screamed concussion. Emily! David! I need the first aid kit! Emily appeared from the galley, already carrying the white case with the red cross, her training overriding the turbulence and fear. David came from behind, helping Marcus ease Sarah into a jump seat and buckle her in before the aircraft could throw them all into the ceiling. Marcus pressed gauze against Sarah's forehead, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. He'd taken emergency medical training years ago when his courier drivers were getting hurt on the job, and muscle memory kicked in even as his brain processed the irony of saving the woman who'd tried to have him thrown off the plane. Sarah's eyes focused on his face, confusion clearing into recognition. You're helping me. Don't talk. You probably have a concussion.
Emily, how far to Chicago?
Emily checked her watch. 18 minutes to initial descent, maybe 35 to landing. Tell the captain we need paramedics waiting, possible head trauma. Emily disappeared toward the cockpit. David took over holding pressure on the wound while Marcus checked Sarah's pupils. Uneven dilation, classic concussion sign. She needed a hospital, needed imaging to rule out anything worse than a simple knock on the head. Derek watched from 1B, his expression showing something that might have been the first stirrings of self-awareness. The man who'd demanded Sarah's attention, who'd grabbed her wrist and treated her like property, watching someone actually care about her welfare, might have been the first time all night he'd considered that actions had consequences beyond his own convenience. The turbulence eased, the aircraft smoothing out into gentle flight. Marcus stayed with Sarah, monitoring her breathing, keeping her awake, asking simple questions to check cognitive function. She knew her name, knew where she was, but couldn't remember hitting her head, a gap in memory that suggested she'd lost consciousness briefly. Mr. Bennett, why are you doing this? Marcus kept pressure on the wound, watching blood seep through layers of gauze. Because you're hurt, and I'm the person closest with relevant training. It's not complicated. After what I did?
After what you did, you need medical attention and accountability. In that order. Right now, you're a person who's injured. Later, you're an employee who violated company policy and federal law. But those are separate issues, and I can handle both without letting one contaminate the other. Tears ran down Sarah's face, mixing with blood on her cheek. I didn't think I was racist. I really didn't. I made assumptions about who belonged where, about who to trust.
And I never questioned where those assumptions came from or whether they were right. That awareness, hold on to it. Use it. When you're cleared medically and we deal with the employment issues, you're going to have to decide what kind of person you want to be. Someone who learned from this, or someone who just learned to hide their bias better. The aircraft began its descent, that subtle shift in engine tone and pitch that signaled the beginning of the end of the flight. Marcus stayed with Sarah, David took over passenger service with Emily's help, and the first-class cabin settled into the quiet tension that comes in the final minutes before landing. Harold Peterson approached, hovering in the aisle until Marcus looked up. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Marcus glanced at the medical kit, at the supplies spread across the jump seat. "Actually, yes. There's a blood pressure cuff in there. Can you check her BP every 5 minutes until we land?" Harold moved with surprising competence, like he'd done this before. "I was an Army medic before business school. Long time ago, but you don't forget some things." The two men worked in synchronized efficiency, monitoring Sarah's vitals, keeping her conscious, preparing for the handoff to paramedics who'd be much more equipped to handle head trauma. Marcus found himself grateful for Harold's presence, for the way crisis had a tendency to strip away pretense and reveal who people actually were underneath the roles they played. Emily returned from the cockpit. "Captain says paramedics are standing by, also FBI agents and airport security, and apparently half the Chicago media." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. The story had been spreading for 3 hours now, metastasizing from social media drama into national news. Of course, the media would be waiting. Of course, this landing would be theater as much as arrival. The aircraft dropped through clouds, city lights spreading below them in that familiar grid pattern that meant Chicago. Marcus had grown up in these streets, knew this city in his bones, and coming home after tonight felt like returning to a battlefield you thought was behind you, only to discover it had just been waiting for round 2. Marcus gathered his backpack as the aircraft began final descent toward O'Hare. Through the window, Chicago's lights spread like a promise and a warning. 18 minutes until everything that had been building in the war room would collide with what had happened in this cabin. 18 minutes until Caldwell would resign, until Derek would be arrested, until Sarah would be wheeled off on a gurney, until 77 witnesses would tell their stories. Marcus closed his laptop and prepared for the reckoning that awaited on the ground, the one Catherine had been orchestrating while he'd been 35,000 feet above it all.